Okay, here's what's happening. We're doing a hybrid event today. We have live people in the audience. Oh, and the camera's shifting according to what my hand does. We have live people in the audience, about 20 of you, social distanced and wearing a mask. And I'm hearing another echo. Anywho, I'm going to keep talking until somebody tells me to stop talking. We're also Zooming live to everybody. So thank you for joining us on Zoom, and thank you for using the chat function. You guys know your Zoom, so thank you for that. So what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce our special guest, Naomi Hirahara, who has come all the way from Pasadena to be with us today. Yay! Thank you, Naomi, for coming. And I did say this before, I'll say it again. I'm sorry that circumstances aren't better so that we could all be together and safe under normal circumstances. But right now, this seems to be the prudent thing to do, just have a limited audience and the rest of you on Zoom, because your safety is the most important thing. So thanks for your understanding. So we have a full program, and I'm gonna walk you through it, give you a little roadmap before we get started. So we have our special guest, Naomi, who's going to come up. She has a slide presentation. She's also going to do a reading from her book, and we'll have a Q&A session. So we'll take questions both from the live audience and also from Zoomers. You can either put your question in chat or somehow let Jill know that you would like to ask your question, and then we'll let you turn on your unmute yourself and turn on your video, and you can ask your question to Naomi directly. We're also going to be joined by Cole Yoshida, who is board member of J-Sei and also the son of George Yoshida, because Cole is going to be doing a reading from Free, Unwhite, and 21, which is written by George. George, who lived in Chicago, and we thought that that was really appropriate because Naomi's mystery, Clark and Division, is set in Chicago and deals with Japanese American resettlement after the camps. So that's a really nice tie-in. So we're really happy to have Cole with us. Then we'll end the program at about 3:15, 3:30-ish. And we'll ask everybody to move downstairs to the front of the building in the parking lot where we have a reception set up. And Naomi will, has kindly agreed to sign books and to say hi to people. So at that point, for those of you who are at home, if you're close by and you want to drive over to get Naomi to sign your book or to grab a cookie, then please feel free to do that. We'll start roughly 15 minutes after we all move downstairs. And that'll go on for about another 45 minutes or so. We'll also be joined by the staff of Eastwind Books, the owners, Harvey and B, who have very kindly agreed to sell books. So if you don't have your copy of Clark and Division, you can buy it from Eastwind at that point and ask Naomi to sign it. I think they will also have a few others of Naomi's books on hand if you want to complete your collection. And I think that's it. I can't think what else we can. Oh, we're actually, there's more stuff. I'm not even going to tell you. We're just going to surprise you. There's more stuff. So it's a full slate and very excited. And technically, I think everything's working so far. So great. So let's get started. Let me read just a very short bio of Naomi first, and then we can get started. So I'm sort of mixing and matching from your bio on your website. So Naomi was born in Pasadena, California. She received her bachelor's degree in international relations from Stanford University and studied at the Inter-University Center for Advanced Japanese Language Studies in Tokyo. She also spent 3 months as a volunteer work camper in Ghana, West Africa. She was a reporter and editor of the Rafu the Los Angeles newspaper, Japanese American newspaper. But she left the Rafu in 1996 to start her career as a writer. I think many of you in the audience are already familiar with Naomi's books. To my count, she's written over 20 books total, both nonfiction and fiction. You might be familiar with her Mas Arai mystery series, 7 books that she wrote that centered on a gardener, a Japanese American gardener named Mas Arai. She's also written a series of books centered on a bicycle cop named Ellie Rush, and she started a new series and was here at J-Sei for the launching of that series, the Leilani Santiago series, which is set in Hawaii. That was called Iced in Paradise. And I had the pleasure of talking to Naomi then when she came to visit. And now she's written her latest mystery that she's going to talk to us about, which is Clark and Division. And so I won't tell you anything more about it because I'm going to let Naomi talk about it. But everybody, let's give a warm welcome to Naomi Hirahara.
I'm wondering if I should do it without the mic because it seems to be working. Do you want me to try it with the mic?
I think everybody heard me. Okay.
Jonathan, if you guys can hear fine, thumbs up. Yeah,
Okay. Why don't you try it without? And if we get
Yeah,
any-
okay. I'll try to project. I just don't want you to go through feedback because that's kind of painful. But thank you all for coming. You're part of my little historic event because this is the first and perhaps only live hybrid event for Clark and Division. I just want to thank Jill and J-Sei so much because when she reached out to me to do something, and I said, can we do something live? I need to see people's faces. Zoom and Crowdcast are fine, but you know, sometimes I feel like I'm just talking into the laptop. Like, is there really people on the other side? So I'm glad to at least see your faces. And many of you are familiar because I've spoken here in the past. And I'm so delighted that Cole Yoshida is going to be a part of this. It's perfect. You guys are in for a treat. Okay, so why did I write this book, Clark and Division? Some people have asked me, are you from Chicago? Do you have roots in Chicago? No. So I've done a little slideshow here to kind of explain to you why I decided to write this book. Clark and Division is if you know Chicago, it's an intersection, a neighborhood in Chicago. It's in the near north area, a little bit below Wrigley Field. So next slide. And this is the book, Clark and Division. Next slide. And I came to J-Sei to talk about this book, and I noticed a few of you have it. I co-wrote a book with my friend Heather Lindquist called Life After Manzanar. And it was basically, it was actually initiated by the Manzanar National Historic Site and their store, because so many people would go through and say, what happened to the people? So Heather and I started to investigate by following certain people, like what happened after they were released. So next slide. So this book has a lot of images. And one of the images, actually this image is not in the book, but there is another image taken by the same photographer. She's a European immigrant who lived in Los Angeles. Her name is Marian Palfi. And she was this amazing documentary photographer. And she did spend some time in Los Angeles, and she took photos of Evergreen Hostel in Boyle Heights. And her images were so searing. And among them was this one, because I think, and I'll show you maybe one other War Relocation Authority image, which is still touching, but it's still kind of more sanitized. Whereas when I saw this, like, you know, many of the photos taken in camp, everyone's hair is beautiful, you know, everyone's smiling. And in this photo, things are totally in disarray. They look like many of our homes during the pandemic, right? They have clothes strewn all over. Their clothes are hanging from the wall. There's some kind of bowl that's on the floor. I think that might be, this was taken in 1946. So there was probably a Rafushimpo newspaper up front because they started republishing. So maybe the person's looking for work. So when I saw this, I go, there's another story. There's another resettlement story. There's another story of people when they were released, that it wasn't so easy, that it was very traumatic. So this is kind of like the tone that I was seeking in writing Clark and Division. So next slide. So this image was actually a War Relocation Authority photo. This family actually was from Sacramento, the Oshima. I don't know if Kenji is familiar with the Oshima family. They ended up in Tule Lake, and then they were released into Chicago. And so with this family, they're kind of bewildered. This is a hostel that they arrived at. And Chicago was the #1 destination for Japanese Americans released from camp. And people ask why. Well, it was the second largest city in the US. Sorry, LA, you were #3 at the time. And also it's in the middle of the country, full of work, defense industry, factories, all those kind of things. Excuse me, I'm gonna get some water. I'm not used to talking so much, so I may cough a little, but I'm not sick, okay? So anyway, so that's some of the reasons why the government, as well as the American Friends Service, the Quakers, kind of identified Chicago as the best place to go. So before World War II, there were 400 Japanese Americans living in Chicago. By the mid-40s, there were 20,000. So that kind of gives you this, like, how intense it was. And of course, the government told these people, don't congregate in numbers 3 or more. Okay, and it's ridiculous, right? Because if you're going you were from the West Coast, incarcerated in desert or swamplands or whatever, with 10,000 other Japanese Americans, and suddenly you're in this notorious city, right? And by the way, most of the early individuals who were released, their average age was in their mid-20s. So imagine, of course, what are you going to do if you're in your mid-20s and you're on your own? Oh, by the way, no parental supervision. Some people, you want to party. Okay, let's be honest. That's what we want to do when we're totally open from the pandemic. We want to party. We want to see people. And so and some young people got into trouble. So among the documents I came across was the Chicago Resettlers Committee from 1940s. They were concerned because there was an incident of babies being born out of wedlock in the community, abortions, which were illegal at the time, a stick-up man, a sex maniac. And so, I mean, some of this you might have realized, some of it might be shocking. I'm a mystery writer, so it's like, this is really fascinating. I need to know more. So that was kind of the seed for Clark and Division. So next slide. Okay, so among the photos that we came across, and many of them, it was kind of interesting. One woman, Ellen Wu, had written about Chicago, and like and she said she could not find, there were like zoot suiters in Chicago, right? Because they originally came from Boyle Heights, LA. They were in Manzanar, and they were wearing their stuff in Chicago. And but Ellen Wu had done research in Chicago, and she couldn't find any photos of these zoot suiters. And one reason why is these folks returned back to the West Coast. So we have them here on the West Coast. So this is Janice's collection. She's a filmmaker. And yeah, so I just, when I saw these photos, it helped transport me in time. If you've read the book, there's a character named Hammer, who is a zoot suitor. So these images kind of inspired that. Next slide. So I was looking at my journal. So if any of you are writers, how I usually envision a book is I get one of these journals and I start stream of consciousness. I start writing ideas. And I was looking at an old journal, December 2016. You know, I had been starting to do research for Life After Manzanar, and I was saying, you know, this is has a seed of a great story. I had a totally different storyline, but I wanted it to be in Chicago. But I knew that I'm from LA. I haven't spent that much time in Chicago that I had to go there. Luckily, I had a friend, Eric Matsunaga, who had a native Chicagoan who had spent some time in LA. And he's a relatively young person, but he's one of these people who loves neighborhood history. He's a social historian. He loves Chicago history. So and then you could, if you're on Instagram, he's on Windy City Nikkei. And then on the internet, he's written a lot of stories about Chicago for Discover Nikkei. So he had done it, when I visited him in October 2017, he had done a Google map where he had identified all these different apartments and little businesses that had been in Clark and Division. Now, Clark and Division was a way station for Japanese Americans. It wasn't a place where people stayed for a very long time. It was known, like further north was a red light district. There was a gambling den. So it was pretty raucous community. I don't know exactly why the Japanese Americans moved there first, maybe because there was just vacant buildings that they could move into. But so that's Eric at Clark and Division Station. They call it the L. It's the elevated, right? But this is the subway. So very confusing. And that's me in front of the LaSalle Mansion, which was one of the boarding homes, apartments in Chicago. Next slide. And I had a lot of friends older friends, J-Sei, who had spent time in Chicago, especially when I was working at Ross and Shimpo. And then I had older Sansei friends who had been born in Chicago, but I never really connected the dots. Like, wow, this was a place where so many Japanese Americans once had lived. But one of these individuals was Sue Kunitomi Embry, who many of you might know. She was a social activist and an educator. She basically fought for Manzanar to be a National Historic Site. And that's a picture of her. And in her oral history, she writes about she had been from LA to Manzanar. She went through Wisconsin and then ended up in Chicago. She got a job at the Newberry Library, and she said it was a very positive experience. It's the first time she had like interethnic relations with her co-workers, and I think it kind of opened her world up. So when I found out the Newberry was close to Clark and Division, I told Eric, we have to go there. And I was astounded. This is not a regular library. This is a high-class research library, you know, wonderful. So, and I was just trying to picture Sue coming from Manzanar to this glorious place. And that became a seed in my story too. So I should tell, I haven't told you anything about Clark and Division. I'll give you a little elevator pitch. So this novel is about a family, the Ito family, and they're from a place called Tropical, which is in Los Angeles. It's present day Atwater, in between Los Angeles and Glendale. And during World War II, they are forcibly relocated to Manzanar, and it's also a story of two sisters. The older sister Rose, and the story is told from the younger sister Aki. And Aki she adores her older sister. She's been in the shadow of her sister. And then Rose gets clearance to leave camp, to leave Manzanar to go to Chicago. And then some months later, Aki and her two parents follow, only to find that something awful has happened to Rose. And so now it's up to the younger sister, Aki, to find out what happened, as well as to kind of carry her parents through this very tumultuous time. So that's kind of the gist of the whole novel. Okay, next slide. And then among the last vestiges, and did you all get a little raffle ticket, by the way? Okay, so this is a clue. It might be kind of connected. The prize may be connected. So there's not much left. There's no Japantown or Little Tokyo in Chicago, but there are Buddhist temples and there's Christian communities. But among the last little hints, one is called the J-Sei Lounge, which is not run by Japanese Americans anymore, but its roots go back to a place called J-Sei Tavern. It was like a liquor store that was located at Clark and Division, and then eventually in the 50s moved up to near Wrigley Field. And but the people who've taken over the place, they still like to, you know, occasionally dip into the history of their bar. It's called J-Sei Lounge. And then Eric and I, he took me to a place, and this looks like kind of like chop suey, right? It's called the Akutagawa, because J-Sei called George Akutagawa went to this hangout called Hamburger King and said, oh, you know, cook me up some hamburger, eggs, green peppers, you know, green onions, bean sprouts, you know. And he just ordered that all the time, and then it became his dish. Another place adopted it, but called it the Okutagawa, so kind of multiplied. But so Eric, of course, introduced me to the food, and yeah, so I wonder if that's related to the raffle ticket. I don't know, but with this next, we're going to take a little break from me, thank goodness, and Jill's going to be introducing our entertainer during the interlude here.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to J-Sei. I'm the education coordinator here, and today is our first hybrid program, public program. So we're really excited to have you here and those of you out there. So we have 29 people online and about 25 people here, I think. So when I got an advance copy, thank you Nichibe, of Clark and Division, so excited. I'm a big fan of Naomi Hirahara, all of her different series. And I've cued in my friend Cole, so he'll be ravishly reading. But I do want to say that when I started reading about Chicago, Clark and Division, I just kept thinking of our friend, George Yoshida. And I remember George always just having such fond memories. I was working on Sanse Legacy Project when I first moved to the Bay Area, and he would go, Jill, you know, what are you guys talking about? I had a great time in Chicago. I had a great time in camp. I met my wife in Chicago, you know. I just don't understand. Anyways, he was always a joy to listen to, and to listen to him playing music, and just to see him, he just lit up. I was working with Brian Comey Dempster, writer, editor, professor, and we did some J-Sei writing workshops, and George joined us, and he wrote a really sweet love story. And I contacted Cole. Cole is one of our board members, and asked if it would be okay if we shared George's essay. And Cole was very excited to help us do that. So that is really exciting. George, not only was he a musician and a jazz musician, he wrote a tremendous book about jazz in the camps. He was an educator. And when he retired, he was a full-time adult school, not full-time, but he was an adult school teacher. He taught at J-Sei for over 20 years. He taught exercise, right, some yoga, some Tai Chi. And then he would run these talk story sessions once a week, where J-Sei would get together and talk about aging and intimacy, and have speakers come and, you know, just share it all. And it was really wonderful to have George part of our mix, and that was before we moved here. So it's wonderful to remember George. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary at J-Sei, and George is very much a part of who we are. So Cole, we'll have you share the rest.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and Jill for the invitation to read my dad's essay. Just a little bit of background. It starts when he's trying to get to Chicago, get released out of Poston, and his adventures to get there, and then meeting our mom, and how they courted each other and eventually fell in love. And it's a very sweet love story. So very honored to be able to read this today and share it with all of you. So it's called Free, Unwhite, and 21. Going to Chicago. Sorry, can't take you with me, wails Mr. 5x5 Jimmy rushing. Count Basie's on the grand piano, pushing Jimmy with his swing and blues band. The tabletop radio is on in my barrack, and I'm dancing by myself in sync with Basie's irresistible groove, and it feels so good. What's that, Jimmy? You're going to Chicago and can't take me? Of course, he can't hear me, because I'm here in Poston prison. Doesn't matter. Hey man, you don't have to apologize, because I'm going. Yeah, I'm going to Chicago too, and Uncle Sam's gonna pay my way. How about that, Jimmy? Well, I did go to Chicago, and Uncle Sam did pay. I wonder if Jimmy knew how it played out. A year after detention in Poston camp, I, with many others, had received official clearance to relocate to the Midwest. We were no longer Japs. Imagine, mainstream America had earlier screamed, Japs, Japs, you can't trust them. Put them away, put them all away. Leaving Poston was our release from prison. Our chains were exchanged for wings. Time to fly. I was going to Chicago. Good friends and hopefully good jobs awaited me. Still, I cannot dismiss the thought of Uncle Sam sooner or later, pointing his finger at me and saying, "I want you." J-Sei servicemen in the European theater had proven themselves to be dependable and disciplined. On a cool and calm April morning, I stuffed a few pieces of clothing and a toothbrush into a raggedy suitcase, said my goodbyes to Mama and Papa. I don't know how they truly thought about my leaving. Mama had concerns for her number one son, who might be swallowed up by an unfriendly city. She looked somewhat sad, unsmiling. Papa said nothing, as usual. He and I had been knocking heads for some time, and I was the selfish, thoughtless son who needed to grow up. My two younger sisters, Masa and Toshi, often victims of an ego-consumed big brother, may have had smiles on their faces, probably glad to see me go. About 10 of us climbed eagerly into the bed of a dusty truck. When the driver kicked the engine over, I thought, damn, we're on our way to Chicago, to the Windy City. It's gonna be great. Skyscrapers and department stores and movie theaters and restaurants. And maybe, just maybe, my fingers crossed, a date on a town with a cute chick. I was so excited I hardly noticed the handful of camp prisoners waving goodbye to us. Soon we approached a lonesome railroad station in Parker, Arizona. Following an interminable wait, we boarded a slow train to freedom. Yeah, I'm on my way to Chicago, free, unwhite, and 21. No longer subject to the censure and strictures of Mama and Papa. I mean, they always used to scold me. Georgie, turn the radio down, too loud. You disturb the neighbor in the next barrack. Or, you'll come home late after dance. Everybody's sleeping. You make too much noise. But Georgie, come eat with me and Papa. You all the time eat with friends. But Georgie, help clean the house. Just sweep the floor, make the bed. That's all we ask. I know they meant well, but man, Mama and Papa and all of us in just a single barrack room. What a drag. I was getting out. Poston Camp quickly became a blurred memory. New thoughts and questions popped into my uneasy mind. What about housing? Never ever rented a room for just myself. Are there Japanese apartments in Chicago? And jobs? Haven't ever worked for a white boss before. Will I be able to go to a nice place, pick up a menu and order? Will I be served? Damn, it's not gonna be easy. I really haven't thought about the ways and means of daily life. Maybe Poston wasn't so bad after all. Going to Chicago felt wonderful, but it was coupled with grave misgivings of an unknown future. The journey took 2 days and 2 nights of suffering the discomforts of an ancient train pulled by an outdated steam locomotive. It chugged through thousands of dry, vegetationless miles. It was tiresome. Imagine a train coach loaded to the max with other eager Poston prisoners. Yes, there were others who were weary, thirsty, and often hungry. Imagine frightened, sleepless infants crying incessantly for attention. Not nice. We young adults fidgeted back and forth in many, many configurations on badly worn red velvet covered seats in search of comfort. Couldn't lie down because there was already somebody alongside. No AC, hot. Open the window slightly, most were impossibly immovable. and we were greeted by a stream of equally warm air conditioned with black soot from the coal-burning engine. As we at long last approached the inner city and its grand central station, we were greeted by graffiti-splashed freight cars, dilapidated factories, and unkept residences. Ooh, this is Chicago? My first breakfast on the outside was so beautiful, I will never forget it. At the American Friends Services Committee hostel in Northside Chicago, which is temporary housing provided by the Quakers for Japanese Americans, the bright sun warmed the breakfast nook just off of the main dining room. Seated at the table alone, without being called to breakfast by the nerve-wracking clangs of that heavy-duty iron triangle, I felt joy. I don't remember all that I ate that morning, but I do remember putting a slice of white bread into an electric toaster, patiently waiting for it to complete its chore. When the toast popped up, I carefully spread a dab of real butter on the bread. The memorable ritual was so long in coming. The first crunchy bite of the delectable morsel was heavenly. Just toast, and it was heavenly. Even heavenlier, is there such a word? Was that many days later, love walked right in, just like the song. And I found my true love, my future missus, in Chicago. Hey, Mr. 5x5, give me 12 more bars of those bad going to Chicago blues, so as I can toss you my Windy City blues in the key of L-U-V, love. Yeah, love walked right in and drove the shadows away. Love walked right in and brought my sunniest day. Cupid's arrow hit its target, and I was walking on air. Her name was Helen. She and roommate Masa, whom I had known in Los Angeles, had come to visit their friend who lived in the same apartment as I did. I was in the hallway on my way to the bathroom with soiled clothes to do my weekly wash in the bathtub. Oh, hi, Masa. What a surprise. I didn't know you were in Chicago. How long have you been here? Oh, George, hi. I've been in Chicago for several months now. I came from Topaz with my sisters. We just dropped by to visit my friend Flo. She's in room 9. Oh, and excuse me, George. This is my roommate, Helen. Helen said, hi, George. I replied, hi, what camp were you in? Helen responded, I came out from Roar just last month. My first encounter with Helen was a brief exchange in awkward niceties. It was a bland encounter, but I did notice how well these two were dressed. They looked fine. Both of them had on handsome coats. I couldn't see their dresses, but they wore nylons and good-looking shoes with medium heels. Their hair had an attractive cut, not too short, not too long. I thought, it must cost a lot to keep up with the latest styles. Would I ever be able to afford to buy clothes for these kinds of proper ladies? Oh well, no need to worry about silly girl matters, I said to myself. I don't think I'll be seeing these two again. And I returned to my laundry chores. Now, the following is a weather report of the Helen and George romance as viewed and recorded by her mom in her 5-year diary from 1941 to 1945. And Dad also wrote, please, Helen, I trust it's okay to disclose your personal thoughts about GY and how we began our journey. And sweetie, please, no lightning bolts aimed at me from your heaven. So the first entry, 1943, October 29, had dinner downtown and met Masa, the roommate, at the Y. Went visiting on the north side, met Flo Abe of LA and George Yoshida. 6 months later, 1944, April 22nd, went shopping. After dinner, George Yoshida and Tug Tamaru dropped over. 2 months later, June 11th, good gosh, slept until 4 p.m. George Yoshida and Ambrose M. came over. 4 days later, June 15th, George Yoshida and Ambrose called for dates. But Masa had a date, so I'll go with George, I guess. June 17th, gads, what a warm day. Phooey. After dinner, George took me Aragon, which is dancing at the Aragon Ballroom. He's loads of fun, keen dancer. Had a Tom Collins at the Downbeat Room, that was their jazz club. June 18th, phew, hot and humid. George, Ambrose, and Kay Kusada came over. We danced and gabbed and laughed. More fun. June 19th, took Papa his Pop's Day gift, which George calls, golly, I wonder if I'm love tiptoes in. June 24th, Saturday, went Aragoning with George and the Downbeat Room later. Got home early Sunday morn. Never before did I stay up so late. So those were the excerpts, some of the excerpts from Mom's diary. And now back to Dad's essay. June 25th, in July and August, a crescendo of love in bloom. Phone calls day and night with Helen, holding hands and taking long, long walks along the shores of Lake Michigan. I remember her soft hands and her sore feet. More movies, good and bad, and more Aragonies with Helen in her stunning but tasty dresses, and I looking sharp in my dark blue 4-button suit and maroon polka dot hanky in my breast pocket. And dig this, a lot of delightful practice on first base. How long did it take you to say goodnight? Yeah, love walked in. No, love roared in. As Ira Gershwin's melody played in my head over again. I had found a world completely new. Hey, Jimmy Rushing, it's Yoshida calling. How you been, man? Just checking to see what's happening with you in the Windy City, JR. I got some heavy news for you. One, met a fine woman on the south side, name's Helen. She's got a sharp mind and look out, a tongue to go with it. Helen's a good dancer, loves to dress up, and to top it off, loves to eat. How about that? Number two, went to hear Billy Eckstein sing some good old blues with Earl Hines at the Regal. What knocked me out was his new singer, named Sarah Vaughan. Wow, she swings. Number three, Uncle Sam finally got me. A bona fide U.S. Army buck private. I'm in training down at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I can operate a Sherman tank and heading for Europe one of these days, but hope not too soon. Well, what do you think, Jimmy? Did I hit the jackpot or did I hit the jackpot? Hope you're doing okay. Catch you later, man. In closing, it's cold and dark here in the barrack. Lights out already. Early tomorrow morning, we're going on a 5-mile training hike, carrying a full pack. I cannot fall asleep thinking about Helen, wishing I was back with her in Chicago, wearing my 4-button suit and dancing up a storm at the Aragon. Great spaghetti in Italian restaurants. Wondering when we'll be going overseas. Thank you.
delighted. Jill gave me a link to the excerpt. I was like, this is perfect. So if you go to church, there's something called responsive reading. So when I read George Yoshida's excerpt, and I think I probably did hear him perform in Los Angeles at some point. And there is a scene in my book at the Aragon.
Okay.
And I think there's a slide of the Aragon. But yeah, because you got to have love. You got to have a little bit of romance, even in a mystery. So this is Aki, who goes to the Aragon for the first time. And Roy is one of her family friends. He's just a few years older than her. Come on, let's jive. I felt someone pulling at my hand. It was Roy guiding me to the dance floor. I was a passable dancer, only because Rose would use me as a partner when she practiced the Lindy Hop in our house. I hadn't gone to many dances at Manzanar. Frankly, I hadn't wanted Mom to be by herself as Pop cavorted with his bootleg friends into the wee hours. To now be engulfed by the music, hearing the trumpet screech and feeling the wooden floors jump with our footsteps, transported me. I was like those couples along the shore of Lake Michigan, not giving a damn about anything. The song ended and Roy whooped, sweat falling down from his oiled head. You can jive, he called out to me. He said it like he was seeing me for the first time. He went to get us something to drink. I tried to find a place to rest, but the ballroom was filled with bodies and no chairs. Ike was surrounded by the trio of Louise, Catherine, and Chio, who all seemed to hang on every word he said. When I first met her, Chio had said that she didn't frequent many dances, yet here she was, looking longingly at Ike. She seemed totally smitten and was asking him a question when I approached Louise, who was lagging toward the back of the group. I saw Tommy, I told her. Tommy was Rose's roommate. Louise, fanning her face, gave me a blank stare. Really? How did that happen? I went to the house where she works. How did she sing? What do you mean? Did she sing well? I frowned. What happened to Tommy? When Louise started to purse her lips, I rushed in to say, tell me this one time, and I promise that I won't bother you again. Louise glanced back at the group. Both Catherine and Chio were too mesmerized by Ike's account of his recent surgical rotation to pay us any mind. Maybe she was feeling too much like a fourth wheel, or thought this was the opportunity to get me off her back forever. For whatever reason, she pulled me a few yards away so that we could talk more freely. She had a bit of a breakdown, she said in a hushed tone. Her eyes remained on the trio whose company she had temporarily left. A nervous breakdown, you mean? Now that she had come this far, Louise had to offer more information. She was afraid of everything, staying alone in the apartment, going out late at night. Rose knew what was going on with her, but they didn't confide in me. I'm not sure what happened, but one night Rose and Tommy had a terrible argument, broken dishes and yelling. The next day, Tommy had moved out. Rose didn't mention her again. It was better when Chio moved in. Things got a lot simpler. A beanpole niece with a faint mustache tapped Louise's puffy sleeve and asked her to dance. And Louise seemed relieved to be able to end our conversation. I, on the other hand, felt totally left out in the cold. What had Tommy argued about with Rose? Could it have had anything to do with Rose being pregnant? How could I get Tommy to talk to me? And then Aki has another interesting encounter with someone at the Aragon. And then she encountered someone else. I was so irritated by the encounter that I almost crashed into someone. Hello, the voice I remembered, but he appeared very different. Instead of a sweat-soaked undershirt, Art was wearing a crisp white shirt, a gray suit, and a maroon tie with two bright stripes across its center. As soon as I recognized him, My whole body started pulsating. Hello. I didn't know you were going to be here, he said. I didn't know you were going to be here, I replied, and we both laughed. We sound like idiots. I guess it never came up. Do you come here every weekend? I pressed on the sides of my face, hoping that beads of sweat wouldn't appear on my hairline and ruin my makeup. Nah, I haven't been in a long time. I guess it's my lucky night. I was struck by his last comment. Was he flirting with me? I wasn't used to hearing such talk, and I let it sink in before murmuring a response. My first, I said. What? It was hard to compete with the din of the lousy music and the sound of hard heels hitting the wooden floor. My first time, I repeated louder. A low yell shook the ballroom. As if pulled by a giant magnet, a crowd moved to the door. Everyone seemed to have lost interest in dancing in favor of gawking at an unexpected occurrence. What is going on? Art asked a couple guys who were rushing towards the action. It's the yoga race again, someone answered. What? I interjected. Hammer Ishimine. He's going at it with Roy Tonai. There could be only one hammer. Without explaining anything to Art, I ran into the eye of the crowd, pushing looky-loos aside to find the source of the hubbub. By the time I reached the center, the scuffle was in full force. A flash of mustard yellow, thuds of fists and hoots from the boys in the crowd. Older men ran in to break up the fight. Roy finally emerged, his nose and lip bloody from his right ear swollen. Hammer's face, on the other hand, was undamaged, but the collar of his zoot suit completely mangled. In a protective stance was his ever-faithful companion, Manju. An older mustache man in his 30s pointed a finger at the zoot suiter. That's it, Hammer. You're not allowed at any of our events in the future. Who cares? These dances are chicken shit anyway. He then noticed me standing there in the circle. Hey, Tropical, let's get out of here. How dare he address me like I was his girl? I didn't move or say anything. Hammer hollered, a howl, as if it was all a joke, and strutted out of the Aragon with Manju at his side. I went over to Roy, who was spitting out a tooth. Luckily, it wasn't a front one. I handed him a handkerchief that I had stuck in the pocket of the dress. Tona, you'll have to go too, the Californian told him. I was defending myself. Heard that you're just as much to blame as Hammer. By this time, Ike had found us and examined Roy's lip. Come on, let's go. You're gonna need some stitches. Without thinking, I went with them, momentarily forgetting about Art. I wanted to run back and convey a proper goodbye, but it was all too late for that. We're gonna quickly go to this last part of the program. Well, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay? Okay, let's quickly go. So next slide. I'm just going to talk a little bit about writing and creating characters, and also my editor took me to task. So I'm going to tell you how I had to address her concerns. So next slide. So this is okay. Creating character. Next slide. So what I had to do. I was writing in first person a J-Sei woman, a younger sister, and she's a character in which she wasn't used to being aggressive and assertive. Her older sister played that role, and she had dealt with racism right before World War II, and had some hard incidents. So she didn't have many friends. She lived in a mostly Hakujin area, white area. So, and her best friend was her dog, who unfortunately died before camp. But anyway, so my task was, how do I get this J-Sei voice, infuse it in the manuscript? And I had to rely on my cigar. I call it my cigar box, because when I was a kid, for some reason, I thought it was so cool to have an old cigar box and put your your treasures in there. So these were in my cigar box, and some things were not things I wanted, but they were still in there. But people, books, experiences, and cultures, things that I had to draw out to improve my manuscript. So next slide. Okay, so these were some of the comments that so I was basically finishing this manuscript during the pandemic, which was very difficult. Although, what I was doing was not very different than before the pandemic. I'm sitting at my living room table and typing, right? But just knowing that the world, was on fire out there, it's going to affect us, right? So I knew I couldn't be as prolific, but I finished it, I turned it in, and then, during that time, my editor took a leave of absence because it was the pandemic and people didn't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding this book, but she eventually returned, and this was what happens when you write a manuscript for a publishing house is your editor gives you this editorial letter. It could be even 13 pages long, just saying, it's mostly the things you got wrong. But these were some of the things my editor said about getting to Aki's head, that I had almost never let us into her psychology. She was saying, give us a lot more insight into Aki's thoughts and feelings. So I realized that I had my own emotional cultural blocks, because I've told you in this presentation how different I am. I'm not from Chicago. I obviously didn't go through the incarceration, any of these things. But I am like a Nisei and a half. My mother is from Japan. She's an immigrant. And in that sense, I could kind of understand Aki and the way she felt about her parents. Like she wanted to be protective, because she and her sister had to negotiate the outside world, for her parents. So that part I understand and understood. And also just the years, I'm an older person, and just dealing with these little jabs, that people say to you over all these years, like, wow, you speak English really well, or where are you from? No, we're Pasadena, California. No, where are you really from? All these little things that kind of stack on, and you just, because, I'm from a certain generation, you just kind of learn to put it aside, And I think in a way that's what Aki had done in her life. And now, how do I kind of explain her mentality to people who haven't had to do that? So, and then I'm not writing this book just like, oh, I want other people to understand this. I'm writing this book even for our own community, maybe even younger people who might not know. So next slide. So these are a couple of things just examples of things that I added in so people could have a greater understanding. This is Aki. I looked down at my hands in my lap. I never considered saying how I felt about things. How could I, when I always seemed to be grasping in the darkness to understand where I stood? And then the next slide. This is another thing. By this time, and I think this was in camp, or maybe right before, by this time we understood how the world worked for us. To articulate the attitudes against us would give them power and credence. We preferred to release the pain silently, let it rise in invisible balloons that we couldn't see but we could feel, bumping against our foreheads and shoulders, warning us not to stray too far from what was expected. So those are just examples of things that I infused in the story. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay, and this is the good news. So after the rewrite, my editor said, it's engrossing, it's exciting to watch, I guess, the development. So, so these are things when I I occasionally lead writing workshops. I tell people when they have problems, One was, well, in my case for this book, I had to interview more people, and they're not only about history. I'm an older sister. My brother is 8.5 years younger than me, and he idolizes me. So we have a great relationship, according to me. But I had to really get into the mind of the younger sister. So I called up my friends who were the younger sister, and get their mentality. Everybody has a different experience, but it kind of helped me. And one of my friends said she did idolize her sister, so she tried on her clothes when her sister wasn't around. So I thought, that's really good. So I integrated it in this book. Minor vulnerable moments. Yeah, I had to kind of think back of times where, people had not excluded me from things, and how did I feel? So I had to go in there. Refer to other novels, especially the classics. One of my editors, very smart woman, and she's going, Naomi, look at Great Gatsby. Is Rose Nick Carraway the narrator? I mean, not Rose. Aki, she's Nick Carraway. Take a look at that. And I took that comment to heart. And one of my Stanford friends wrote a little book on Great Gatsby. So I called her up. Why do you like Nick Carraway's, narration? And we went through some of the passages. And I'm not sure if it really helped me, but it was kind of fun to do. And be aware of your emotional and cultural blocks. There could be things inside of us that kind of keep us from going and writing certain things. So that's just some writing tips. And I think we're coming to the end. So what's the next slide? Oh yeah, questions, questions, and then the door prize.
Oh, we already have a question. Okay. So I'm not sure where I'm going to stand. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Okay, the audience can hear me. Can everyone on Zoom hear me? I hope that's okay. So I'm just going to kind of stand off to the side here. I'll try to take questions from the audience, and then I'll repeat your question just to make sure that everybody on Zoom can hear the question. I want to reserve the first question for me.
Okay.
And it's actually, I just wanted to say that we started a book club at J-Sei, and I didn't know if you know, but our next book is your book, Clark and
great.
Division.
Thank you.
So is it okay if we have any questions or comments, if we just kind of shoot them your way?
Of course. We could do a Zoom.
Oh.
I don't know, but then it's more technology. But then if you're zooming from your homes, it's probably easier.
Yeah, actually, we're pretty high tech in our book club, so that's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
so I want to open it up to folks. You can raise your hand in the audience, or let Jill know that you have a question. Either type it in the chat, or just let Jill know that you'd like to ask a question, and then Jill will prompt me for that. So let's see a show of hands. I think Cole, you had your hand up. Why don't you go first?
Thank you. I'm also a recent fan of murder mysteries.
Yeah.
And so thrilled to meet you today. My question to you is, how do you take an initial idea, like Chicago in the 40s, Japanese Americans there, and glue that into something beyond manuscript? Because the books I read seem to be very complex. They have characters coming in and coming out, there's different roles they play, and you have an editor that you're trying to respond to as well. How do you make those changes to either the plot or the characters or whatever to keep everything fluid and moving? Everything hangs so well together when I read the book, but I'm just amazed at what you folks do to take it from an idea to a 300-400 page.
Yeah. I think for me, and it's funny, during the pandemic, I've been able to speak to Michael Connolly. He's the one who did Bosch, more than I ever have in my whole life, because we're on Zooms, and I think we both share like the journalistic we're both journalists. Not that all crime writers are journalists, but many of us are. So I do think there's something about that curiosity, like we can sense what's going to be a good story. So I think that's part of it. And I think that there's always the element of surprise because you don't, I mean, I think that's what's entertaining for readers. They want to be surprised. They don't want to be tricked, but they want to go, whoa, I didn't even think about that. But then when they go back knowing who did it, they go, oh, I understand now, it makes sense. I think it's also just like practice, but it is difficult to have a lot of characters, and usually like you slowly kind of introduce them as you go along. This book is not a traditional murder mystery. I mean, I did talk to my editor about it. Some people would have started it right in Chicago but then I started off with Aki's birth. You know, she heard stories about, because the relationship between the two sisters, it was just as important as the crime aspect of it. I had to establish the relationship. But slowly, like Roy, that one character, he comes in during the pre-World War II. So you kind of slowly, you know, introduce all these characters. And you also have to make it like, this is a potential suspect, which is kind of, you know, that part is kind of tricky. But a lot of times you make mistakes and you kind of learn from that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you want to ask first or? Okay, go ahead.
I read all of the Manzanar books except the last one because I don't want to read it because then it will be open. How do you know that it's time for it to be open?
Well, Moss in the last book is 86 years old. I mean, that's the thing about aging your protagonist, right? Because he's only going to be doing so much. You know, with that was an homage to my father. And I wanted it to end well. Because haven't you read or watched a TV show that was like one season too long? Like, they shouldn't have kept going with that. They should have just stopped it, you know? And in the same way, I knew Moss had to end up in Hiroshima. You know, that he's an atomic bomb survivor. You know, it had to end there. And he's such he's such a pungent character. For me to be in his head is, you know, it's hard for me to get out of it. You know, he talks in dialect. You know, he's a very, very stinky character. But I will say, I'm thrilled with Hiroshima Boys out in Japan this year, this month. So I'm really delighted because usually the Japanese don't like stories written by foreigners, and I'm a foreigner, set in Japan. So the fact that they decided to translate it is like, yay, you know, so oh, and apparently this is for the insiders. The translator put a lot of Hiroshima Ben in the translation. So it's like, that is so cool. So yeah.
Do you have other questions?
There's
Oh, go ahead.
First, I wanted to thank you for this book because, you know, my parents ended up in Chicago and I never really thought about what that would be like. And so I was busy looking at your map and finding where my mom first ended up, which is about 5 blocks away from the library. So I was so excited. But it was mentioned that some of the things in the book are true. So I'm curious, what was true?
You know, in this book, all the crime that was, there were really those kind of crimes that happened. I mean, I don't know who did that, you know, it's not like a true crime. But it's not like I just invented, oh, let's have this crime happen in the book. That stuff really had happened. So even those crimes perpetuated by non-JAs, they had happened too. Yeah, yes. You read the book?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, so.
I read it one day.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, and we don't want to spoil it for everybody, but what you just mentioned did happen. It was even worse than I had related in the book. But yeah, I really thought with this book I wanted to stay close to history because there's not much written about Chicago. You know, I think once we've amassed this understanding of what had happened, then people can riff off of it and do science fiction, fantasy. They could do like really fun things, but, and also because I'm a social historian, I wanted to stay, you know, as true as I could about, you know, but it is a crime novel, so, you know, it's not going to be the same as George Yoshida and the Helen story, although there's glimpses of it, right? There is glimpses of that, you know, happiness in there, but Aki has her own unique story that, you know, in Chicago that she has to do. Thank you for reading. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. You know, I sometimes think that historical fiction is easier to start with because, I don't know, it just flows so much more.
Well, here, there's not much, unfortunately, in oral histories about what, you know, kind of the dark side of Chicago. You could read between the lines, like they said, oh yeah, there was a scuffle, there was these gang, you know, but it's like minimized, you know. And then even, so I did, there's a wonderful oral history on the Janum Regenerations by Kate Kuwahara. She had a beauty shop in that Mark Twain Hotel. So I had fictionalized it, but there was really a beauty shop there. And then she talks about cutting the hair of these cross-dressers who are entertainers, you know, and Kate is such a sweet woman, and she had no judgment over people who came through her doors, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
If we were to go to Chicago, is there anything left?
Not, you know, I would contact Eric Matsunaga, you know, and then also go to the Discover Nikkei. Like he has done one on Lakeview and Southside, and you could, you know, print out those articles. He has maps, and you could kind of like, if you go Southside, go with someone else. But you know, like the Lakeview area, I don't know if your folks lived in Chicago for a long time or not, or if it was.
My grandparents stayed.
Yeah, and a lot of them stayed in that Lakeview area. But you could take a little walking tour, or even reach out to Eric. He's so gung-ho about the history. He probably would take you on a personal tour. Or you could maybe get a group of people, get like 5 people.
I feel like I've read something about the place where you ate.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The Octagon? Yeah.
Yeah, something. Maybe it was on Discover Nikkei. Maybe Eric wrote it. But any other questions?
Yeah, is there going to be any more version?
I'm
waiting for it to get out as possible.
I know. You know, it's just the vagrancies of publishing. My editor, she got let go through the consolidation, so that kind of killed the series. She's actually working with James Patterson now. So I was telling her, yeah, James Patterson has like a Japanese American storyline. Yeah, I'm there. But no, not right. Unfortunately, it would be great if I could get her to be a homicide detective, but not at this particular time.
Oh, yeah, I really love those Ellie Rush novels. They were great. But I hear through the grapevine that there's another Leilani Santiago.
Yeah, that's going to come out in March of next year.
So it's done.
Yeah, it's done. It's yeah.
So we'll have you back here in March.
Yeah, in person. Fingers crossed.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Did we get anything from Zoom?
No.
All right. Well, if anybody thinks of anything, let me know. Oh, yep. Okay.
So, I'm not, I don't really want to do this, but I'm not really familiar with you. But somebody was mentioning you, I want to have What was that quote? It sounds, I didn't quite hear this.
Let me repeat the question. So he's asking about the mysteries that are set in Hawaii. And that's the Leilani Santiago book that I just mentioned. So do you want to talk more about that?
Where the main character is Leilani.
Yes, yes.
Is that a white Japanese person?
She is Filipina, Japanese, and white. And they run a shave ice stand in Kauai. But she's not a real person. She's not a real person.
What was the name of that book?
Iced in Paradise,
What's the second book called?
An Eternal Lay.
Okay, well, we're right at about 3:30, so great timing. We are going to have that mystery drawing with the prize that we don't know exactly what it is. Do you want to tell us what the prize is?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I only have a small, so if it doesn't fit, you give it to a friend. But it's J-Sei Tavern. You can put it on your wall. And so it's just the J-Sei liquor store, and so the J-Sei, what was it called? The lounge. Yeah, they were selling these T-shirts, and I grabbed it. I think a couple of years ago. They're not selling anymore. So this is a collector's item.
What a fantastic prize. So here we have everybody get a ticket. Let's show you on the screen.
Oh, but they don't get one. So.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I always say this, put on your reading glasses. The last three numbers, 387.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody. Great. All right, I'll just say a few
Yeah.
closing words. So thanks everyone for coming. Jill is going to show us a sweet clip to end our program. It's, can I tell them who it is? Yeah. Okay. It's a clip of George Yoshida dancing with his daughter. So we're just going to share that with you. And right after that, we can all move downstairs where there's refreshments that I'm sure it's J-Sei, so there's going to be a ton of food, I'm sure. And also B and Harvey Dong from East Wind Books have set up downstairs so you can purchase books if you want. And Naomi will be available for signing. And for those of you in the Zoom audience, if you're anywhere near Emeryville, come on down. So thanks for showing up. This is really great. We were so honored to have Naomi. We were really honored to have Naomi and Cole to read from two really great written treasures that our community, I think, is starving for. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want, I can give you a little more background if this is the same video I think it's going to be. We all got a chance to go to San Francisco, to Yoshi's San Francisco, and Dad was being honored by the city of San Francisco on George Yoshida Day kind of thing. So he couldn't play his drums anymore, but like he said, he still likes to swing. So he was given the opportunity to go up and sing this crazy song, and invited my sister to come up and, you know, as he used to say, he likes to shake his booty. So that's what this is about.
George. Henry. 32 bars and over. Then we go right into the first chorus where I'll be singing.
George is a spry 89 years old. George Yoshida, as a youngster in the internment camps, brought his alto saxophone along so that he could play dance music in the internment camps. George is playing jazz a long time, and he's going to join us tonight on this little piece.
Wham, reba, boom, bam, I'm a killer diller, yes I am. Wham, reba, boom, bam, I can do the Suzy Q. Wham, reba, boom, bam, if I can do it, you can too. Now some folks say swing won't stay, and it's dying out, man. But I can tell you anyhow, they don't know what they're talking about. Wham, reba, boom, bam, I can sing and I can dance. Wham, reba, boom, bam, I'm a killer dinner, yes I am. Say that we won't stay, that I'm all about. But I can tell you anyhow, they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, wham, reba, boom, bam, I can sing and I can jam. Wham, reba, boom, bam, I'm a killer dinner, yes I am.
Thank you, folks. George Yoshida, 89 years young.
If you understand the legacy, it's easy to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.